Ethan was a force, pulling me under with every touch, every whispered word, and I let myself fall, craving the escape he promised. The city lights spilled through the windows, casting a silver glow across the apartment as Ethan led me to his bedroom, a sanctuary of dark sheets and dim lights. A single candle flickered on the nightstand, its sandalwood scent heavy in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of wine on my tongue. My heart pounded, a mix of fear and desire, as he closed the door behind us, the soft click sealing us into this moment. "You're shaking," he said, his voice low, almost tender, as he stepped closer. His hand brushed my cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of my jaw, and I leaned into his touch, craving the warmth, the certainty of his want. "Lena," he murmured, his lips brushing my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. "Let go, just for tonight." His words were a key, unlocking the part of me I'd kept buried, the part that wanted to feel alive, wanted, seen. I closed my eyes, letting the world outside fade, and kissed him back, my hands tangling in his dark hair, the strands soft under my fingers. His touch was deliberate, confident, as he guided me to the bed, his fingers deftly unbuttoning my blouse. The fabric fell away, pooling on the floor, and I felt exposed, not just in body but in soul, as if he could see every crack in my resolve, every doubt I'd buried. The sheets were cool against my skin, a contrast to the heat of his hands as they roamed, mapping my body with a hunger that felt both thrilling and dangerous. The city hummed below, a distant pulse that matched the rhythm of our breaths, the glass walls reflecting slivers of neon light, red, blue, gold, that danced across his skin. Ethan's eyes held mine, intense, unyielding, and for a moment, I was his entirely, no guilt, no mark, just the weight of his body and the promise of this moment. He whispered my name, a sound that felt like a claim, his voice rough with want, and I let myself fall, drowning in the sensation of being desired. His lips traced the curve of my neck, my collarbone, each touch a spark that burned away the weight of my life, the bills, the monotony, the quiet despair. My hands gripped his shoulders, feeling the strength beneath his skin, and I surrendered to the rhythm we created, a fleeting escape from the truth waiting outside these walls. When it was over, we lay tangled in the sheets. The candle burned low, its wax pooling in the holder like spilled secrets. Ethan's arm draped across my waist, his breathing steady, but I stared at the ceiling, the city lights blurring through unshed tears. The thrill was fading, replaced by a hollow ache that settled in my chest. I thought of Mark asleep in our bed, trusting me, his steady presence a contrast to the chaos I'd invited in. Ethan stirred, kissing my shoulder, his lips warm but distant, and his touch felt different now, less like a lifeline, more like a chain. "My name is Lena Marie Thompson, and I'm 32 years old. My husband, Mark, is 34, and we've been married for 11 years, together for 13. We were kids when we fell in love, two dreamers in a small town, chasing a life we thought we could build together. I used to paint. Back when I believed I could be someone extraordinary, my sketchbook filled with vibrant landscapes and portraits that captured the world as I wished it could be. But life has a way of grinding down your edges, and now I'm a part-time warehouse worker, and Mark's a factory man, both of us tethered to bills we can barely pay. If you'd asked me a year ago if I could betray him, I'd have laughed, sworn on my mother's grave. Never. And yet, here I am, living a lie that's tearing me apart. The lie began on a Tuesday evening, as quiet as a held breath. Mark and I sat at our kitchen table, a thrift store relic with scars from spilled coffee and heated arguments. The table was cluttered with bills, electric, water, the mortgage, each one a brick in the wall closing us in. Our bungalow, a modest two-bedroom we'd bought 6 years ago, felt like a dream we couldn't afford anymore. The creaky hardwood floors, the faded yellow curtains, the chipped mugs we drank from, they were ours. But they were also anchors, tying us to a life of relentless struggle. Mark's factory job covered the basics, but my part-time shifts at the warehouse, sorting boxes under flickering fluorescent lights, barely paid for groceries. We were drowning, and I was desperate for air. I got offered a night shift, I said, stirring my coffee, the spoon clinking against the mug. I kept my eyes on the swirl of cream, avoiding Mark's gaze. Double pay, Mark. We could catch up, maybe save a little. His face softened, the worry lines around his brown eyes easing. Mark was solid, dependable, with broad shoulders and hands rough from years of manual labor. His dark hair was streaked with early gray, a reminder of the years we'd spent fighting to stay afloat. His brown eyes held a warmth that had drawn me to him 13 years ago, when we were just kids dreaming of a simple life, a house, a family, a trip to the coast someday. That's amazing, Lena. You sure you're up for it? Those hours are brutal. I'll manage, I said, the lie slipping out like a practice line. It's temporary, just until we're back on our feet. There was no night shift. The warehouse didn't offer them, and I hadn't asked for extra hours. But I needed a cover, a way to explain the hours I'd soon spend elsewhere, caught in a web I hadn't yet named. Mark leaned across the table, kissing my forehead, his lips warm against my skin. You're incredible, he murmured, his trust a weight I didn't yet feel. I smiled, hiding the tremor in my hands, my heart pounding with the secret I was already carrying. The truth was, I was slipping away, drawn to Ethan Caldwell, my boss, whose presence had begun to haunt my thoughts. Ethan was 35, the youngest regional manager at the company, with a corner office that overlooked the city's skyline, a glittering sprawl of lights that felt like another world. He was magnetic, tall, with a sharp jawline, dark hair that fell just so, and green eyes that seemed to see through me. I'd noticed him months ago, during my first week at the warehouse, when he'd handed me a clipboard and his fingers brushed mine, lingering a moment too long. The touch had sent a jolt through me, a spark I hadn't felt in years. Since then, he'd found reasons to pull me into his orbit, schedule reviews in his office, inventory checks in the back of the warehouse, casual chats that stretched into something heavier, charged with unspoken intent. His voice, low and smooth, would linger in my mind long after I left work, and I'd catch myself wondering what it would be like to let him in. That Tuesday, he'd asked me to stay late. Paperwork, he'd said, leaning against his desk, his eyes suggesting more. I should have gone home to Mark, to our bungalow with its chipped paint and cluttered shelves, where a photo of our wedding day sat framed on the mantel, Mark in a rented tux, me in a second-hand dress, both of us beaming under an oak tree. Instead, I stayed, my pulse racing as Ethan locked his office door, the click echoing like a line crossed. His kiss was fierce, consuming, a spark that ignited something reckless in me. My body answered before my mind could protest, my hands gripping his shirt as he pressed himself closer. His lips moved to my neck, and I felt the world tilt, my resolve crumbling under the weight of his touch. By the time I left, my lips bruised and my heart racing, I knew I'd stepped into something I couldn't undo. I grew up in a small town an hour from the city, raised by my mother, a seamstress who worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. My father left when I was 6, and I learned early to hide my dreams from a woman too tired to believe in them. I'd sketch in secret, filling notebooks with vibrant landscapes, fields of wildflowers, stormy skies, faces that told stories I'd never share. I wanted to be an artist, to live a life bigger than the one I saw around me, but high school ended and dreams didn't pay the rent. I took a job at a diner, then a retail gig, always telling myself I'd save enough to go to art school. But then I met Mark, and love changed everything. Mark was 21 when we met, a mechanic's apprentice with a shy smile and a steadiness that felt like home. He'd grown up in a working-class family, his father a factory worker who died young, leaving Mark to care for his mother and sister, Claire. He was loyal, the kind of man who'd fix a stranger's tire in the rain, and when he looked at me, I felt seen. We'd spend evenings in his beat-up truck, parked by the lake, talking about the future, a house, kids, maybe a dog. He proposed in a park, on one knee with a ring he'd saved a year for, a simple gold band with a tiny diamond that caught the light like a promise. I said yes without hesitation, and we built a life in our bungalow, filling it with second-hand furniture and plans we swore we'd make real. But the years wore us down. The factory layoffs hit Mark hard, forcing him into a lower-paying job. My appendectomy 2 years ago left us with medical bills we couldn't shake, and the endless grind of making ends meet dulled the spark between us. The bungalow, once a symbol of our dreams, became a reminder of our failures, the leaky roof we couldn't fix, the nursery we never filled. I stopped painting, my sketchbooks gathering dust in a closet, my dreams buried under the weight of reality. Mark was still Mark, steady and kind, but I felt trapped, invisible in my own life, a ghost haunting the edges of who I used to be. Ethan saw me, or at least, he made me feel seen. He'd listen when I talked, his eyes locked on mine, and tell me I deserved more. "You're too good for that place," he'd say, meaning the warehouse, but I heard it as more, too good for my life. For Mark. It was a lie I wanted to believe, and Ethan knew it. He played on my insecurities, my fears, until I was his, wholly and completely. I'd catch myself daydreaming about him during my shifts, the hum of forklifts and the smell of cardboard fading as I replayed his words, his touch. The warehouse was a soul-draining place, its concrete floors stained, its air thick with dust, and Ethan was a beacon, a promise of something more. The first night at Ethan's apartment set the rhythm of my deception. I told Mark the night shift started that week, packed a duffel bag with my Navy work polo and khakis, and kissed him goodbye. "Text me when you're done," he said, his voice thick with sleep, his arm draped over the faded quilt we'd bought at a flea market. I nodded, my throat tight, and drove across town to Ethan's high-rise, a sleek tower of glass and steel that gleamed under the city lights. It was a far cry from our bungalow, where every corner held memories of Mark and me, our first dance in the living room to a crackling radio, the time we painted the walls and ended up covered in primer, laughing until we couldn't breathe, the quiet nights when we'd sit on the porch, dreaming of a future that felt just out of reach. Ethan's apartment was on the 22nd floor, all sharp angles and luxury, black leather furniture, abstract art in bold slashes of color, floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a painting. The air smelled faintly of cedar and wealth, a stark contrast to the musty warmth of our home. He greeted me with a glass of red wine, his fingers grazing mine as he handed it over, the touch sending a shiver through me. "You look stressed," he said, his voice smooth as silk, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Let me fix that." I wanted to believe him, to sink into the fantasy he offered. We didn't talk about Mark, or my marriage, or the gold band I'd slipped into my pocket, its weight a quiet accusation. Ethan was a force, pulling me under with every touch, every whispered word, and I let myself fall, craving the escape he promised. The city lights spilled through the windows, casting a silver glow across the apartment as Ethan led me to his bedroom, a sanctuary of dark sheets and dim lights. A single candle flickered on the nightstand, its sandalwood scent heavy in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of wine on my tongue. My heart pounded, a mix of fear and desire, as he closed the door behind us, the soft click sealing us into this moment. "You're shaking," he said, his voice low, almost tender, as he stepped closer. His hand brushed my cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of my jaw, and I leaned into his touch, craving the warmth, the certainty of his want. "Lena," he murmured, his lips brushing my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. "Let go, just for tonight." His words were a key, unlocking the part of me I'd kept buried, the part that wanted to feel alive, wanted, seen. I closed my eyes, letting the world outside fade, and kissed him back, my hands tangling in his dark hair, the strands soft under my fingers. His touch was deliberate, confident, as he guided me to the bed, his fingers deftly unbuttoning my blouse. The fabric fell away, pooling on the floor, and I felt exposed, not just in body but in soul, as if he could see every crack in my resolve, every doubt I'd buried. The sheets were cool against my skin, a contrast to the heat of his hands as they roamed, mapping my body with a hunger that felt both thrilling and dangerous. The city hummed below, a distant pulse that matched the rhythm of our breaths, the glass walls reflecting slivers of neon light, red, blue, gold, that danced across his skin. Ethan's eyes held mine, intense, unyielding, and for a moment, I was his entirely. No guilt, no mark, just the weight of his body and the promise of this moment. He whispered my name, a sound that felt like a claim, his voice rough with want, and I let myself fall, drowning in the sensation of being desired. His lips traced the curve of my neck, my collarbone. Each touch a spark that burned away the weight of my life, the bills, the monotony, the quiet despair. My hands gripped his shoulders, feeling the strength beneath his skin, and I surrendered to the rhythm we created, a fleeting escape from the truth waiting outside these walls. When it was over, we lay tangled in the sheets. The candle burned low, its wax pooling in the holder like spilled secrets. Ethan's arm draped across my waist, his breathing steady, but I stared at the ceiling, the city lights blurring through unshed tears. The thrill was fading, replaced by a hollow ache that settled in my chest. I thought of Mark asleep in our bed, trusting me, his steady presence a contrast to the chaos I'd invited in. Ethan stirred, kissing my shoulder, his lips warm but distant, and his touch felt different now, less like a lifeline, more like a chain. I slipped from the bed, gathering my clothes, the cool floor grounding me as the weight of my betrayal sank in. I dressed in silence, my uniform rumpled but unworn, and left at dawn. The city waking around me, delivery trucks rumbling, streetlights fading, the world indifferent to the line I'd crossed. I stopped at a gas station, splashing cold water on my face in the bathroom, the fluorescent light harsh against my reflection. My eyes were shadowed, my lips still tingling from Ethan's kisses, and I barely recognized the woman staring back. I texted Mark from the parking lot, just finished. Long night. Love you. His reply came instantly, a heart emoji, and I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, hating myself, but not enough to stop. The lie grew roots, spreading through my life like ivy, twisting around every moment, every choice. Mark and I had met at a county fair of all places. I was 20, working a summer job at a diner, and he was there with friends, his laugh catching my attention as he tossed a baseball at a carnival game. He won a stuffed bear, handed it to me with a shy grin, and asked me out for coffee. We talked for hours that night, about everything and nothing, his dream of starting a small carpentry business, my sketches, the way we both loved the quiet of a starry night. He was steady where I was restless, grounded where I was a dreamer, and together we felt like enough. We moved to the city after we got married, chasing better jobs, but the city was relentless, its pace grinding us down. The factory layoffs hit Mark first, then my hours at the warehouse got cut, and the bills piled up, each one a reminder of how far we'd strayed from those kids at the fair. Ethan knew I was married. I'd mentioned it once, early on, when he'd asked about my weekend plans. Happily, he teased, leaning against a stack of crates in the warehouse, his smile sharp. I'd hesitated, a split-second pause that gave him the opening he needed. What happens here stays here, he said, his voice a promise, and I clung to that rule, as if it absolved me. He was careful, meticulous, using a burner app for messages that deleted after reading. We had rules, no calls, no public outings, no traces. He'd give me gifts, a silver necklace with a delicate pendant, a silk scarf in deep emerald, a pair of earrings that caught the light like stars. I hid them in my car's glove compartment, claiming I'd bought them with overtime pay when Mark noticed. "You're spoiling yourself," he'd say, proud, his eyes crinkling, and I'd smile, my stomach twisting with the lie. At the warehouse, I met Tina, a single mother who worked the same shifts. She was tough, with a quick laugh and a knack for reading people, her dark braids swinging as she stacked boxes with precision. Over coffee breaks in the cramped break room, we'd talk about her daughter, Mia, a 6-year-old with a gap-toothed smile, or her ex, who'd left her for someone younger. Tina was a survivor, balancing rent and daycare on a warehouse salary, and her resilience made my complaints feel small. She noticed my distraction early on, the way I'd check my phone too often, my eyes darting to Ethan's office. "You okay, Lena? You seem far away," she said one day, her voice gentle but probing. I brushed it off, claiming exhaustion, but her eyes lingered, and I wondered how much she saw. The affair became my second life, a parallel world where I was someone else, bold, desired, free. Every evening, I'd leave home in my navy polo and khakis, promising Mark I'd be careful. I'd drive to Ethan's, where the nights blurred into a haze of desire and deception. His apartment was a sanctuary, its sleek surfaces and city views a stark contrast to the cluttered warmth of our bungalow. We'd drink wine on his balcony, the city sprawling below, and he'd pull me close, his hands sure, his voice low. "You're mine," he'd whisper, and I'd melt, even as part of me screamed to run. At work, he was professional, barely acknowledging me in front of others, but in stolen moments, behind a stack of crates, in the break room after hours, his touch was electric, a reminder of the secret we shared. But I started noticing things about Ethan, the way he deflected questions about his past, claiming it was boring, the late-night calls he'd take in another room, his voice muffled, the faint scent of perfume on his jacket that wasn't mine, a floral note that lingered like a warning. I ignored them, telling myself it didn't matter, that this was just a moment, not a future. I was in too deep, addicted to the high of his attention, the way he made me feel like I was more than a struggling warehouse worker, more than Mark's wife. Mark never suspected. He'd leave a plate of leftovers in the fridge, wrapped in foil with a post-it note. For my hard-working girl, he'd text encouragement, "You're a rock star, Lena," and fall asleep before I slipped into bed, careful not to wake him. His trust was my shield, but it was also my cage, a reminder of the life I was betraying. Each lie built a wall between us, and I felt it, a pressure in my chest that grew heavier with every night I spent with Ethan. I'd catch myself staring at him, wondering how he couldn't see the truth in my eyes. I'd flinch when he touched me, my body still echoing Ethan's, and sleep became fleeting, replaced by nightmares of Mark finding out, his face crumpling as I confessed. I'd wake in a cold sweat, Mark's arm heavy across my waist, and lie there, counting the lies I'd told. One night, I nearly slipped. Mark was fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen, his tools scattered across the counter, a smudge of grease on his cheek. "You seem off, Lena," he said, not looking up, his wrench turning with a steady rhythm. "The night shift's killing you. Maybe take a break?" I froze, my heart racing, and mumbled something about needing the money. He nodded, trusting, and I hated how easy it was to lie to him. I wanted to reach out, to tell him everything, but fear held me back. What if he left? What if I lost him forever? The first crack in my carefully constructed world came from Claire, Mark's older sister. She was a nurse, with a no-nonsense demeanor and eyes that missed nothing. We'd never been close. She thought I was too impulsive, too quick to chase dreams that didn't pan out, but we'd maintained a polite truce for Mark's sake. Claire adored her brother, her loyalty fierce, and I knew she'd do anything to protect him. She'd noticed my distance at family dinners, the way I dodged questions about work, my eyes darting to my phone. I'd catch her watching me, her lips pressed into a thin line, and I'd force a smile, my heart pounding. One evening, as I left Ethan's building, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, I saw her across the street. Her car was idling, her face illuminated by the dashboard light. As she stared at me, her expression unreadable. My heart stopped. She wasn't supposed to be there. She lived on the other side of town, near the hospital where she worked night shifts. I ducked into my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys, praying she hadn't recognized me. But an hour later, my phone buzzed with a text that felt like a guillotine. "Lena, we need to talk. I saw you tonight, leaving that building. Tell Mark, or I will. You have 3 days." The message was a shard of glass, cutting through the haze I'd lived in. I drove to Ethan's, my vision blurring with panic, and showed him the text, my voice trembling as I explained. I expected comfort, maybe a plan, but he leaned back on his couch, his expression cold, his whiskey glass glinting in the low light. "Handle it," he said, his tone flat. "If this gets messy, we're done." His words were a slap, stripping away the illusion of care. I'd risked everything for him, my marriage, my integrity, and he was ready to walk away without a second thought. I left his apartment in a daze, the city lights blurring through my tears, the weight of my choices pressing down like a storm. The next 3 days were torture. I went through the motions, kissing Mark goodbye each evening, driving to Ethan's only to sit in my car, unable to go inside. Ethan's indifference had shattered something in me, exposing the fragility of the life I'd built on lies. I saw him at work, his eyes sliding past me as if I were invisible, and I realized how little I'd meant to him. I'd been a game, a distraction, nothing more. Mark noticed my distance, his brow furrowing as he watched me pick at my dinner, the spaghetti cooling on my plate. "You okay, Lena? The night shift's wearing you down. Maybe you should cut back." His concern was a knife, twisting deeper with every word. I wanted to confess then, to fall into his arms and beg forgiveness, but fear held me back, a vice around my heart. I thought about Claire's ultimatum, replaying her words in my mind. She'd seen me leaving Ethan's building twice before, she later told me, her car parked discreetly as she pieced together my lies. She'd debated telling Mark, her loyalty torn between protecting him and giving me a chance to come clean. But that night, seeing me hurry out with my duffel bag, my hair disheveled, she'd made her choice. I considered lying to her, claiming I'd been visiting a friend, but she'd seen my car, my uniform, the way I'd glanced around like a thief. She wasn't stupid. I could beg her to stay quiet, appeal to her mercy, but Claire's loyalty was to Mark, not me. The truth was my only path, but it felt like stepping into a void. On the third night, I couldn't stall anymore. I came home early, my uniform discarded in the car, the gold band back on my finger, its weight a quiet accusation. Mark was in the living room, sprawled on the couch with a beer, watching a baseball game, the TV casting a blue glow across his face. He smiled when he saw me, then frowned, sensing the weight I carried. "You're home early. Everything okay?" I sat across from him on the worn armchair, my hands clasped to stop their trembling. "Mark, I need to tell you something." The words came slowly at first, then in a rush, jagged and raw. I told him about Ethan, the fake night shift, the months of lies. I didn't soften the truth, didn't make excuses. I told him about the apartment, the gifts hidden in my car, the way I'd betrayed him night after night. His face changed as I spoke, the warmth draining, replaced by a stillness that scared me more than anger. His brown eyes, usually so open, became distant, as if he were seeing me for the first time. His hands, resting on his knees, clenched into fists, the knuckles white. "How long?" he asked, his voice low, barely controlled. "For months," I whispered, my throat tight. "Why?" The word was a wound, raw and bleeding. I fumbled for an answer, my voice breaking. "I don't know, Mark. I was lost. I felt trapped, and he made me feel seen." "I'm so sorry." He didn't yell, didn't curse. He just stared at the floor, his jaw tight, his breathing uneven. I waited, my breath shallow, for him to speak, to do anything. "Mark, please," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Say something." He stood, his movements slow, deliberate, like a man carrying a weight too heavy to bear. He grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door, the same jacket he'd worn when he proposed, its leather worn soft from years of use. "I can't be here right now," he said, his voice flat, and walked out. I heard his car start, the engine fading into the night, and I was alone, the weight of my confession crushing me. I sat there for hours, staring at the empty couch, the baseball game still playing, its cheers a cruel contrast to the silence in my heart. The days that followed were a blur of silence and regret. Mark didn't answer my calls or texts, his absence a void I couldn't fill. Claire confirmed he was staying with her, sleeping on her couch, but she wouldn't say more. "You broke him, Lena," she texted, and I felt the truth of it in my bones. I'd betrayed the one person who'd loved me unconditionally, and for what? A man who'd discarded me the moment things got complicated. Ethan ghosted me completely, avoiding me at work, his office door closed when I passed by. I heard through Tina that he'd been seen with someone new, a blonde from the corporate office who laughed too loudly at his jokes, her hand resting on his arm. The betrayal stung, but it was nothing compared to losing Mark. I kept working at the warehouse, needing the income, but every shift was a reminder of my lies. The hum of forklifts, the endless stacks of boxes, the way Ethan's office loomed at the end of the hall, it was a prison of my own making. I threw his gifts, the necklace, the scarf, the earrings, into a dumpster behind a gas station, their weight too much to bear. Tina became a lifeline, sensing my pain without pushing for details. We'd sit in her car during breaks, sharing takeout, and she'd talk about Mia's latest school project or her own dreams of opening a bakery someday. "You're more than this, Lena," she'd say, her voice firm, and I'd nod, wanting to believe her. I started therapy at a low-cost clinic, sitting in a cramped office with a kind but tired therapist named Dr. Ellis. She had graying hair and a soft voice, and she listened as I unraveled the reasons I'd fallen for Ethan. It wasn't just boredom or financial stress, she said. It was deeper, a fear of being ordinary, of fading into a life of quiet struggle. I'd grown up watching my mother sacrifice her dreams, and I'd sworn I'd be different, but somewhere along the way, I'd lost myself. Ethan had offered a mirror, reflecting a version of myself I wanted to be, desired, bold, free. But it was a lie, and I'd paid the price. Ellis asked about my painting, and I admitted I hadn't touched a brush in years. "Maybe it's time to start again," she said, and the idea felt like a lifeline. I signed up for a community art class, held in a drafty community center with paint-splattered tables. The group was small. A veteran named Tom who painted jagged abstracts to process his PTSD, a widow named Sarah who captured her late husband's garden in soft pastels, and others carrying their own regrets. I started small, sketching the city skyline, then moved to bolder pieces, each stroke a way to process the chaos I'd created. Painting became my anchor, a way to reclaim the girl who'd once believed in beauty, in possibility. I moved out of the bungalow, unable to afford the mortgage alone, and rented a studio apartment near the warehouse. It was small, with peeling paint and a leaky faucet that dripped like a metronome, but it was mine, a blank slate to start over. I kept working, kept attending therapy, kept painting, trying to forgive myself, though that felt impossible most days. I wrote Mark letters, pouring out my regret, my apologies, but they went unanswered, returned unopened in the mail, their edges worn from my hands. I saw him once at a grocery store, his cart filled with frozen meals and a six-pack of beer. He was thinner, his eyes shadowed, but he looked steady, like he was finding his way. When he saw me, he nodded, a small gesture that felt like mercy. We didn't speak, but that nod was enough to keep me going, a sign he didn't hate me completely. I heard later, through Jake, Mark's friend from the factory, that he'd moved to a new apartment and started a job at a construction firm. Jake was a burly guy with a quick laugh, and he'd been Mark's confidant since high school. They'd go fishing on weekends, sharing beers by the river, and Jake had noticed Mark's stress before I confessed, though he hadn't pushed. After the confession, Jake helped Mark move out, packing boxes in silence as Mark processed his pain. "He's trying, Lena," Jake told me when we ran into each other at a coffee shop. "Give him time." I nodded, grateful for the update, but I didn't reach out. Mark deserved to move on, to find someone who wouldn't break him the way I had. Months passed, and the pain became a dull ache, a constant companion. I kept painting, my small apartment filling with canvases, cityscapes, portraits, a stormy sky that mirrored my guilt. One night, I painted our bungalow, bathed in the golden light of a summer evening we'd spent on the porch, Mark's arm around me, the air thick with possibility. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, a piece of the life I'd lost and the woman I was trying to become. I mailed it to Mark, along with a letter, not expecting a reply, but needing to send it anyway. I didn't know if he'd open it, but it was a step, a way to say I was sorry one last time. I'm still here, in my small apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of what was. The bills are paid now, but the cost was everything. I betrayed Mark, I betrayed myself, and the secret I thought I could keep became the truth that destroyed me. I think about Ethan sometimes, his cold dismissal, his effortless charm, but mostly I think about Mark, his smile, his trust, the life we could have had if I'd been stronger, braver, better. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself, but I'm trying. I go to work, stacking boxes under the warehouse's harsh lights. I come home, painting until the early hours, each stroke a small redemption. I live one day at a time, carrying the weight of my choices, a reminder of the woman I was and the woman I hope to be. And maybe someday, I'll find a way to be whole again, to build a life that's honest, even if it's alone.